Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life Podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm looking across at a man who recently took the IQ test and scored aggressive. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL, Garrett Unclebach, a man whose intelligence can't be measured by the academics.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Well,
How do you score aggressive on the IQ test?
That's the joke, G.
You wad it up and throw it back at the...
I don't know. It was your test, dude. You tell me. I don't know. I just had to... I literally just made that up right before we started.
That is silly.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that is a unique core strength of yours is violence and aggression. You would say is a God-given thing to you. And
yes, it is.
And that's not something that people normally describe. Why are we talking about that? Well, today's a very special episode for us. And I feel like if you were to go back and piece all our episodes together, you could probably maybe put this episode together and not quite fully because we're going to go into some things that have never been talked about before. But the whole goal of this today, we're going to dive into Garrett's life story. And it's almost like you're the guest on the podcast, and
it's interesting, and I'm excited to do it because, normally you would just hear this stuff if you listen to me on somebody else's podcast. And I just did one that I think is coming out this next week. And, you end up going in all these different directions and where it's not so much about me as it's about a story or about a message or about a point. But I'm excited to get into this with you today because you're someone who understands me very well. So I'm looking forward to your line of questioning.
Yeah, well, what I really want for people, and I know we both want the same thing in this. I mean, one of the things I identified in you early on was just a guy living at a different level. But when I looked at you, I realized that a lot of people looked at you and just said like, oh, he's a Navy SEAL, and they would write off what you were saying. They wouldn't know they were doing this, but in their subconscious, it was like, well, I can't do that because he's got special powers. And really, that's a cop-out, but we don't realize we're doing that. We do this all the time when we see somebody that we admire and we just kind of go like, oh, that's good for them. Like, why aren't you inspired by that? Why don't you want to pursue that? So the hopes here is that I can hopefully apply my learner brain to, knowing you as well as I do. And we want people to see things that they can grasp hold of and take hold of too. Because I think there's very little about you that is unattainable. Like, I use the violence and aggression thing as a reason. You have some other things.
We all have unique things about us.
Yes.
But there is a lot from my story that I wish people could learn. So much of my life, I just feel like if people could see what I've seen or if they knew what I know, that they would do things differently.
Yes, man, and that's what I want. I actually came up with a little formula for your life that I think is, I'm going to give it early on because it may be the episode title. I haven't decided yet. But I would say the formula for Garrett's life is identity plus dreams plus action equals possible. And I think you'll see that when we go through his story. There's so many things that you've done that have been reoccurring themes where I feel like because of the identity that you've had in knowing who you were, combined with your dreams, you took massive action and you turned those dreams into reality. And I think that's something everybody can relate to. So many times people will come to the point where they're getting tested or they're being questioned and they'll stop. And I think what's made you special and what makes you you is that you kept going. And I really hope that people can be encouraged by this episode from that.
Well, what I think is cool about that is, identity plus dreams plus action equals possible.
Yeah.
It's really what this whole podcast is about for people.
Yeah.
When we start in the very beginning and I picked the name, that's what I wanted people to have.
Bro. I came up with the name. We need to get this out. I remember it very specifically, so don't try and steal my credit. Okay. Anyways, I may edit that out because it probably makes me look like a jerk, but it's true.
Okay, you edit it away.
I will, bro.
But anyways, the point of this podcast is that people would look at their life and that they would realize that anything is possible for me. Because I feel like that's been so much of my own life story and that's what I want for other people.
Yes. Yeah, that's what we're trying to encourage people constantly. So let's not talk around it, G. Let's get straight into it. So
hit me with your first question.
I'm going to go very linearly as far as timeline in your life because I want to get people to get an early idea of what you were like, because what you were like as a kid had elements, but like anybody, it's very different to what you are now.
For sure.
So just give me like an overall picture. What is young Garrett? I'm talking like 6 years old, 7 years old and younger Garrett. What is Garrett like?
Yeah, I would tell you at my youngest, and my parents would say the same. I have a daughter who's 2.5 years old, and I was just looking at pictures with Nick in my office of me from when I was that age, and we look so similar. Really, truly, my oldest daughter and I, we look a lot alike, and our temperaments are very similar too. She's very aggressive. She's very sweet, but she's very aggressive. She's very passionate. Like, she knows what she wants.
Chicken nuggets. That's what she wants. Yeah.
And when she knows what she wants, she's going to get it.
Right.
But she's also very sweet. And what people would have told you about me at that age is that I was very kind. People, some people who knew me at this age still call me this. Like my nickname, what people called me when I was 4 years old and 5 years old was Gare Bear.
Right.
And don't call me that unless you knew me when I was Gare Bear. Some people who've been around my family have tried to call me that, and I've quickly warned them, unless you knew me when I was Gare Bear, you're not entitled to call me Gare Bear.
Wow. It's out there in public now, man. I'm surprised you mentioned it.
Well, we're getting into who I am. So
Yeah.
this is an important part of that. So to answer your question, really who I was at a young age, I would tell you I was very kind. I was very loving of people around me, but I was also, very passionate and driven. And by 6 and 7 years old, I was showing Nick a picture of
Yes.
me. This is some of the natural things about me. I was in a karate class when I was 7 years old, and I have this picture. Maybe we'll share it or something like that. And I'm in a class with all 7-year-olds, and I look like I'm ready to rip someone's head off. But the other kids in the class look like they're playing Pokemon.
Right.
And so like that's an area where at that age, you'll see something that is unique to me. Like no one made me want to be that way. It's just the way that I am.
What I'll also point out about that picture, because I've heard you tell this about that picture numerous times, your form is way better than the other kids. And you talked about you went on and you had a green belt test, and you just
One of the kids in the class with me was one of my best friends at the time. We'd been in the class the same amount of time.
Right.
We'd gone to the same amount of classes. But I really liked karate.
Right.
At that time I did. I went on to not like karate anymore because of some of the experiences that I had. But at that time I really liked it, and I wanted to be really good at it.
Right. So you always had that sort of drive. If you got into something, you were all in.
Well, I mean, if you look at my genetic makeup, there are genes for addictive behavior. I have every gene that says, if Garrett tried drugs, he's going to be addicted to drugs. If Garrett tries alcohol, he's going to be addicted to alcohol. I have all of the obsessive and addictive behavior genes.
Huh. I didn't know that, man.
Yeah.
There you go. I'm learning something new. Okay. Well, one of the things that we're going to get into, and I feel like it's just such a reoccurring theme with you, it is resilience, and it comes from a strong belief in yourself, like a real strong sense of identity. So I want to ask, what part did growing up in the environment you did with your parents and Pastor Keith, what did that play in developing that belief?
Well, I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it every chance I get. There were some things that my parents said to me early on in my life that they said repeatedly. And my parents were people, I'm so blessed. My parents love me. I trust deeply in my parents. I never questioned that their care for me. I never questioned that they had my best interest in mind, which unfortunately that's not everyone's experience with their parents.
Big time.
But I never questioned that my parents had my best interest in mind. So when they told me things, I believed them, right? And that they also lived with that level of character, that they did what they said. So when they're telling me something, it's true.
Yeah.
Right. And so my parents would always, told me from the time I was very little, they say, God has a plan for your life. Right. And that doesn't mean anything when you're 5 years old. It doesn't mean anything when you're 10 years old. It does start to mean something as you get into your teens. And I remember it meaning more to me even when I was 20 years old. But as you get older and you've heard that so many times, like it to be true. Like I know God has a plan for my life. I didn't question it. And my parents also told me many times from when I was little that you can have anything you want as long as you're willing to pay the price for it. And that's what I call the infinite potential unlock. When you have purpose, God has a plan for your life. When you have potential, you can have anything you want as long as you're willing to pay the price for it. When you have purpose and potential, you're infinitely capable to go out and become whatever God has created you to be, right? So where I had a lot of strong sense of identity, right, is because of the way my parents cared for me and because my parents spoke a purpose over my life. And there were people who prayed for me. There were people who prophesied over me. There's things that, aren't necessarily like recreatable for everybody, but also at the core of that, I was just loved by my parents and I knew who I was.
Yeah.
And so when you have not everyone's going to have a strong sense of identity at that age, but you can develop a strong sense of identity at any age.
Yes.
But it was such a massive setup for success in my life because I knew who I was and I didn't question that. And when other people question that, I just questioned them. I didn't go back and they're like, well, man, are they right? I never thought that.
Yeah. Man, if you're a person whose parents were not as rock solid as yours, as far as they did what they said all the time, getting that sense of belief and trustworthiness, like you said, what a great superpower to have. And I think I'm glad you highlighted that.
I think about so many of, some of them made it, some of them didn't. I think about so many of my peers, and we'll come back to this later, but I think about so many of my peers going through SEAL training. Most of these guys didn't know who they were and were simultaneously trying to prove their father wrong.
Yeah, man. Well, that's most of the world, man. Yeah. If you look at the identity questions that Jesus got when he was being tempted by the devil, first two of the three were, if you really are the Son of God.
Right.
So identity is at the core of everybody who's getting shipped away. It is such a massive topic, and we're going to come back to that. So I feel like we're going to keep saying we're going to come back to it. We will, I promise. So I'm just painting a picture of early Garrett. So I this kid who has an incredible sense of belief, who has these parents, and if you're a parent out there, catch what he said. Do what you say. Don't tell your kids there's going to be consequences and then not do it because it's inconvenient. And
there were plenty of very normal things about me. I collected action figures, loved Dragon Ball Z, and I played lots of video games.
Yeah.
I'm this. If you're worried about your children playing video games, I'm the success story. I played tons of video games. I actually made a few dollars playing video games. But I also did other things. It wasn't all that I did.
Yeah.
I loved from a young age. I loved competition, and that's why I loved video games so much, because any young, and girls play video games now too. It wasn't as popular back then for girls to play, but any young guy who played video games, like when you play with all your friends, it meant something.
Oh, dude,
you were playing for so much, and I loved that. Yes. I loved how serious everyone took it, because I didn't like. From a young age, I didn't like casual play.
Right.
Like when the game, like, let's get everyone in the whole neighborhood and play a game for who's the best. And that, like, from a young age, I loved that.
Now, what's interesting about that, so one of Garrett's top 5 strengths is competition. But what is competition and wanting to be tested tied to? It's confidence in yourself. It's an identity.
Yeah.
So we're going to link some of these themes. Now, one of your great strengths that you talk about is learning from others. Like, you have some very early defining moments that I always find interesting. So let's talk about a couple of them. What were some of the early defining moments you gathered from watching others that really stayed with you?
Well, I would tell you, like, one of the earliest defining moments in my life. There's moments that I remember before this, but this is, like, I would say the first moment in my life where I saw something and it shifted the way that I thought. Huh. I was about 7 years old. We were swimming. My parents had a great parenting philosophy of have the nice backyard, invite all the kids over. Right. And then I can parent all, because my parents were good parents. And they're like, well, I don't want my child to go to other people's houses. Right. We'll just always invite everyone over here. Yeah. So my parents always, parenting tip for you, if you can do it, and just invite all the kids to your house and be that house. And so my parents were also a really good influence on some of the neighbors' kids. But anyways, everyone's swimming at my parents' house. My dad was also a contractor. So when you're in construction, you can just build yourself a nice pool.
Yeah, that's nice.
He literally built, like, his company built our pool. But anyways, everyone's swimming at our house. And one of my friends, one of my neighbors, he went to jump off the diving board, which he had done so many times before. But a combination of, who he was as a person and our age, all of us were 6 and 7 years old. For whatever reason that day, he got stuck on the diving board. And we're yelling at him like, hey, jump in the pool. I mean, this is the end of summer. We've all been doing flips off the diving board all summer. But he's having this moment on the diving board where he's struggling and he's about to cry. Like he's just kind of having a breakdown. Like it was just like a little thing, and then it became like a serious thing. And I was encouraging him. I'm trying to get him to jump off the diving board. And then eventually we got up there, we helped him jump in the pool. But I remember that moment, and I remember thinking back on that moment that I never want that to be me, right? I never, his fear of jumping in the pool. And it was such fake fear, right? Because there was nothing for him to be afraid of, but fear had just gotten a hold of him in that moment, and it had taken charge of him. He'd done it before. Like, how foolish of a fear was it? He jumped off the diving board so many times before, but for whatever reason, he got wrapped up in it in that moment, and it kept him from being where he really wanted to be in life, in the pool with his friends, right? So he turned what should have been a great moment in his life into a horrible moment. And I realized at that age, it's not like I was, it's not like I had analyzed it to the point okay, I know that I don't want fear in my life, and I had really verbalized it that way, but I caught that moment of I don't ever want to be him.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about that before, and you said that you didn't like people, that things trying to control you. And when you realized that fear was one of those things that would control you and dictate to you, that's when you really began to despise it.
I felt like he became someone else. I watched him become someone else in that moment out of fear. Yeah. And I said, that'll never be me.
Yeah. I love that you got that at such a young age, because you've actually helped me with that process. And if you haven't listened to our 3-part series on fear, you should, because that's one of the things we talk about is really despising fear. And you do that because you realize how much it robs you.
Yeah. If you've never listened to our podcast, the episode on fear, please do.
Yeah. Because that's when you actually realize what it's robbing you, you don't have to be Garrett and not want people to tell you what to do. You'll just realize you're getting robbed blind. It's so powerful. Okay, so now she's one of my best friends, and I love her dearly. But you also said that your sister was a person that you learned from watching a lot as well.
I being around Pastor Keith and around my parents and just the environment I grew up in, from a young age, I learned to love quotes.
Right.
I can go back and find some stuff that I, school projects from like 5th grade all the way through 8th grade. And you can see like leadership DNA in me because of the stuff that I wrote in school. And one of the first quotes that I loved was Benjamin Franklin. He says, "A wise man can learn from his mistakes. A wiser man learns from the mistakes of others."
Yeah.
And that was something that I really took to heart because I remember my first thought on wisdom as a young person, like looking at wisdom through a competitive lens. I want to be wise. Like I want to be wiser than others. Like that was, I put a competitive lens on wisdom. And Benjamin Franklin says, a wiser man. I'm like, well, I want to be him. I don't want to be a wise man. I want to be a wiser man.
Yeah.
And the wiser man learns from the mistakes of others.
Right.
Right. It's the fool who says, I mean, we've all done this at some point in our life. It's the fool who says, I have to learn for myself.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the first big things in my life, I watched my sister, who's 3 years older than me. My sister's an incredible, wonderful person. I love her deeply, and so does Nick. But she's a few years older than me, and she was the firstborn child in my family. And I watched her at 16 years old make some pretty difficult mistakes. Right? I won't go deep into that story, but my parents, ripped her out of school.
Yeah.
We moved. Like my parents made aggressive moves when they saw my sister making poor life choices. But I also remember like how hard that was for her, how hard that was for my parents. And I was just like this third person or fourth person living in our home. Like I'm not a party to this, and this is scary. And I don't want any of that. So that also, like that moment, it's not so much that I learned from those specific mistakes, more that it caught me like I need to be paying attention to the mistakes of others. So I learned, I've one of the themes in my life is, for a long time, and I even still experience much of it today, where I'm the young person in my group, right? So at 12 years old, I joined our youth ministry, and I'm 12. The next oldest person is my best friend, Josh Kraft, who's, 3 years older than me, and he was the second youngest person in the group.
All right.
Everyone else is, 17. There's some 16 years old, but everyone else is like 17 and 18. So it's, Josh, a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds, and then me at 12.
Yeah.
Or 13 coming into it. And so I've always had this theme of being around a bunch of people that are older than me, which has allowed me to learn from so many other people's mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just listening to you see just hearing how you describe that event. I mean, you said, and your mom will actually talk about when you were younger, that you were very tenderhearted. And she said that actually the only things you really got in trouble for in school was when you would try and help people who were really struggling when you weren't supposed to. And so you always had this sensitivity to what other people were feeling, which has clearly died because the way you treat me now. But it's nice to know that it was there at some point.
Well, it is still there. I just, I'll say, look at the fruit.
Dude, you don't have to respond to that, man. I just think it's funny, bro. Yeah.
No, I do actually. It's not something you would think when you meet me as a person or you spend a lot of time around me that you think like, oh man, Garrett really cares about other people.
Yeah.
But I would tell you, I don't care that people know that I care about people. Right. But what I want is that my life shows that I care about other people.
Yeah. As someone who knows you very well, I will tell you that you do care. What surprised me about you is that oftentimes when I think you're going to be like harsh, you're actually very gentle and loving with people. And then the people that I think have maybe like, oh, you'll be a little bit easier on them because those are the people that you actually hold the most demands for. And so a little side note, if you're one of those people who knows Garrett. So let's keep on trekking here. So this is something I'm actually really curious because I don't know what the answer to this is. So you did a lot of things, man. Like you've talked about, you got into parkour and because you love Jackie Chan and ninjas. Seriously, you had a huge takeaway from The Matrix where you watched.
So there was this major pivot point. I feel like I know where you're going with this. So if I go down this road and I'm going the wrong direction, just stop me.
Go for it.
But there was this major pivot point in my life around 8th grade. Right. Like if you look at me when I'm young, there's some things about like if you look at this picture of me as a 7-year-old in karate, you're like, that's a different little dude right there. But also if you look at pictures of me when I'm in like 8th grade, people called the movie that came out that year that I'm in 8th grade is Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah.
And I had like super curly, I'm going through puberty. So like I have curly hair today, but it's like soft curly hair.
Right.
You're going through puberty. It's not good curly
You had a
hair.
legit fro.
I had a fro at 12. And I was just goofy, you're grown. I was By the end of my 8th grade year, I was 6 foot, but I was still really skinny. So I'm goofy. I got this fro. People are, telling me I'm skinny, that I'm weird, all these things. And it was a major pivot point in my life. There's something else that happened to me between my 8th grade and 9th grade year. I started there's a lot of things. First thing, I joined this athletic group that trained me to be fast. Right. It was called Zoom back then, but it's basically like my parents sent me to speed training camp.
Okay.
And so I went from like one of the, I was just middle of the pack to the fastest kid the next year in school because I went to the speed training summer camp. That had a big impact on me. One of the other things that happened to me this year is I watched the movie. We've talked about this before. I watched the movie The Matrix for the very first time. And that movie had a profound impact on my life. There's so many things that I like about the movie today,
yes.
Right? But the thing at 12 that had a profound impact on me was it shifted my thinking from thinking, when you're young, you're just trying to develop yourself. You're trying to be skilled at sports and all these things. Well, what shifted my thinking to realizing how powerful my mind was.
Yeah.
I was waking up to this with some of the things that had happened in my life, the ways that I'm thinking, the people that I'm around. But that movie painted a clear picture for me that the most powerful people are people who can control their mind.
Right.
Right. If you have it, you can have this, strong body, skills, all these things. But if you can't control your mind, you're very weak. And I saw how in the movie The Matrix, this girl, Trinity, she says, I need a helicopter patch. And instantly she can fly a helicopter. And that was like a click for me that I'm like, man, the difference between me and a pilot is in my brain. The difference between me and a surgeon is in my brain. The difference between me and I start naming all these different things is it's not my hands, it's what's in my head. And so it made me think man, I have to be a great learner. I have to learn how to absorb material and I have to use the power of my mind to become great. It's not just like being out in the backyard and practicing, throwing baseballs or whatever the sport is.
Let me ask you something real quick because you did kind of get where I was going because I was going to ask you what made you take massive action because so many other people get interested in things and they don't. But I'm starting to put this together. So you grow up in this household where you don't have to question things because your parents are honest with you and they're consistent. So when you see something like that, it spurs a massive belief in you. And actually, that movie came out in '99. You were way ahead of the curve because now it's pretty common in psychology. They'll tell you that your brain doesn't know the difference between real life and fake, which is why dreams can be powerful, which is why mental rehearsal can be powerful. Can you share the story about the sideways?
Yeah. So the other thing I went to that speed training camp, which helped me. What that made me believe was that I was actually a good athlete.
Right.
I would tell you, as far as just if you look at my past history, I'm like a slightly above average athlete. I wouldn't call myself a great athlete. If we go play any sport, because of the way that I think and because of my competitiveness, because of the amount of size I have, I'm going to do all right in just about any sport.
You're a good athlete.
But so going to speed training camp, watching The Matrix, and then at the same time in my life, I also got into a sport which wasn't even really a sport back then, called parkour. Right, and I'd always loved Jackie Chan movies because Jackie Chan, he could just do things. He's a great, all of his films are so great. He's funny and cool, and he just has his own specific flair. But he would also do things like run 14 feet up a wall and jump over something, and his hands didn't even touch the wall. Yeah, and then he just, smirks at the bad guys from the other side of the wall, puts his hands in his pockets, and walked away.
And he did all his own stunts.
All these things that he did in those movies are real. He did parkour before parkour was ever a thing. So I watched a lot of those movies growing up. And then I see these videos about parkour and really get into this. And what I loved about parkour, and the sport has gone so far at this point, but in those early years of parkour, I actually helped develop the sport. I was at the front. It was a cool thing to be a part of. I was at the things that I'm seeing people do on the internet. I'm advancing at the same level. There weren't people way ahead of me in this sport. So it was cool to be a part of something like that. But really what I took away from parkour was this mind-muscle connection that I was able to create, just like I had learned how to do from The Matrix. There's this flip. The first time I went to the gym, you want to talk about lid lifting, the first time I went to a gymnastics gym, I was I want to do this. So I go to a gymnastics gym, and I saw this girl who was a college cheerleader, and she was large.
Yeah.
Right? And I saw her do a backflip.
Right.
And I'm like, if she can do a backflip, I have more athletic ability than she does.
Yeah.
And I can't do a backflip. And I said, I'm not leaving the gym until I do a backflip because it's not within my body. It's not like I need to leave and go train and then come back. I have all of the physical ingredients. I'm only missing the mental ingredients, which I can change today, right? Like you can't change your physical makeup in a moment, but you can change your mental makeup in a moment.
Yeah.
And so I watched this girl do a backflip and I said, I'm doing a backflip today. And so I did a backflip my first day there at the gym. I can still do a backflip.
I've seen it.
Yeah. I got into a lot of other activities, but there was this one acrobatic maneuver called a side flip that I really wanted to do. And I saw this guy do it on YouTube. And I broke down this clip of him doing it on YouTube to like a 1.7 second clip of him doing the flip. It was just the flip, like the setup and his body movement. And I broke it down that short so I could watch it over and over and over and over again. And I literally watched this 1.7 second clip thousands of times to where I'm seeing myself do it. I'm feeling myself do it. I would leave, go play with my friends and be doing something. I would close my eyes for a second and rehearse, right? Like I was trying to prove something to myself, something that I believed that I thought was true, was the power of the mind. And so I did this enough. I did this for like a week of just like obsessing with this. And I accomplished this to do this flip, executed it perfectly the first time I tried. And that was a major unlock. Like it reassured me of one, people didn't think that way. No one taught me that.
Yeah.
People would think that's crazy, but I did it. And so that taught me really the power of the mind. It's like so much of what I learned there at that age still influences me today because I know what I'm capable of, because I know what I can think. I know what I can visualize.
Yeah. I love that. So, I mean, you've done this over and over again where you've gone there first in your mind and you've grown in your mind first, and then reality's kind of caught up to you.
That's like the first story. You've heard other stories in my life. That's the first story that's created some of these other stories in my life.
Okay. Well, I do want to focus on the 8th grade and forward, but before we do, I'm kind of curious because I'm wondering if it happened before the 8th grade or if it was after. So you love it. This is your favorite question to ask people who come on our podcast who have achieved something great. And as a former Navy SEAL, you've achieved that is a greatness in its own. So when did you know, man? Like when did you first know or start to suspect, hey, I think I might be a little bit different?
I would tell you I suspected I was different at that age. I would tell you I knew when I was around 16 or 17.
Okay.
I was very at that, if you ask my recruiter coming to the military, he would say that's the most arrogant person I've ever met.
Right.
He just never met somebody like me. And we've talked about this on the podcast. I also didn't have the emotional intelligence at that age that I have today. Arrogance isn't so much about you; it's also about the way that you make another person feel.
Right.
And at that age, I was not concerned with how I made other people feel. I was trying to grow.
Yeah.
But so anyways, by the time I would say 16, 17, coming in around my junior year, I felt like I knew. And that's where it was, you've heard me say this before, I'll say it now, like my junior year coming into it was during my senior year where I prayed a prayer and I said, God, why did you make me this way? Because I knew I was different. And I said, why did you give me these things that I feel like I don't know what to do with? But to answer your question, it was around 12 where I was like, I feel like I'm different. And really not just I feel like I'm different. I know at 12 years old, I thought I want to be different.
Yes. That's interesting. So when you prayed that prayer, what did you feel like God said to you?
What the prayer when I was a senior, I feel like I didn't get any answer. It was like it was an ongoing prayer. It's like what was on my spirit all the time.
So you felt frustrated because you're like,
I was trying all these different things. Like I got into Pastor Clay will tell you this. I got into music for a little while.
Okay.
My senior year, I got into piano. And the first time I brought a piano home, I played for 14 hours until my pinky started bleeding. Because there was this song, I'm like, I'm going to learn how to play this song. Like I got really obsessed with some things for short seasons in my senior year, trying to what is it that I'm supposed to do? What is it that I'm supposed to be? I knew at that point I didn't want to go to college. I just felt like it's what everyone's doing, and if everyone's doing it, it's certainly not the path to greatness. So what is the path to greatness?
Yeah.
It's not going. I didn't like school. I liked learning. I liked reading. I didn't like school, and so that also pushed me away. Like, man, 4 more years of this because it just sounds like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people out there that.
So then I discovered I was really thinking I wanted to join the military, but I didn't. To be a pilot, you had to go to college.
Right. And
when I realized that, and that kind of was like, man, well, I don't want to do that, but I want to be a pilot. And so I was like trying to figure out, is this the thing for me? And then I was watching YouTube videos of Joseph Kinninger, 1962, jumped from, I think, 105,000 feet. That jump's been recreated today, jumping from the edge of possibility. I was watching a video of that, and it suggested to me the Discovery Channel documentary Bud's Class 234.
Yes.
And it suggested that to me. I watched the whole 4-hour documentary straight through, and I said, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And within a couple weeks after that, I went and saw my recruiter.
Since we're at this point, I do want to go back to 8th grade, but before we do, where did the desire to, you said that your desire for the military was born from a desire to serve. Like, where did you get that desire from?
So growing up around Elevate Life Church, which it wasn't Elevate Life Church back then, it was Celebration Covenant Church. That church started in 2000, so I was 10 years old. Pastor Keith, who we've had on the podcast, when he started that church, this is 23 years ago.
Yeah.
Back then, nobody really talked about like church and leadership at the same time, and he did, and he also would talk about servant leadership a lot. And I grew up going this. One of my friends who's a doctor, he talks about he's retired now. He's in his 80s, but he's studied people his entire life. He's one of, if you know the personality profile program DISC.
Yeah.
He's like, he inherited that from the guy who created it.
No way.
So,
I love DISC. Yeah.
Right. So he's studied people since this is his entire life. And so this is like some of his anecdotal feedback. He said, if you don't learn hard work by the time that you're 12, you probably won't learn it short of a traumatic event. And I look at my own life. Where did I learn hard work? Really, the place that I learned hard work was, hunting with my dad and church. When you start a church, you don't have a building. When we started the church, we had to do setup and tear down every single. We didn't even start on we weren't on a Sunday morning. We were on Sunday night when we started the church, because all the Sunday mornings and all the schools in Frisco were taken. So we started on a Sunday night. And then a few years later, we shifted to Sunday morning. But every weekend, we had to drive down. My dad's pastor's best friend, so he's fully bought into this. We have to drive down, set everything up, set up all the chairs, set up the stage, set up the lights, set up the sound, set up the projectors, set all of that up, have church, and then tear it down.
Yeah.
Right? And my dad took me with him everywhere he went. So all these things, I'm doing all this. At 10, I wasn't super helpful, but I would tell you I was a lot more helpful than other 10-year-olds because of the amount of time that my dad spent on me. Right? Just on that for a second, my dad spent so much time on me. I remember when I was 12, my dad was taking some people out hunting to our hunting lease, and there was a lot of guys with us, and he said, "Okay, you guys are going to go with me, and then you two guys are going to go with Garrett." And they laughed at him. And he said, "No, I'm serious." Right? Like, he had spent so much time on me at 12 years old. There were grown men, and he's saying, "You guys listen to my son."
Yeah.
He knows what to do.
That's amazing.
A lot of people wait until their, sons and daughters are 14, 15. Like, okay, now I'll start to invest in them.
Yes.
They should be so far along by that point.
Yeah.
But anyways, where I learned to serve was from, setting up church and spending so much time serving at church. And hearing Pastor Keith talk about servant leadership, that it put this desire in me to I couldn't even conceptualize it back then, but at a young age, I thought well, my life's not for me.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I wanted to serve in the military. And the military also was attractive to me from not just from the movies and stuff like that, but I knew it was a test, and I knew it was something that was exciting. And especially as I got a little bit older and thinking man, that's probably what I'm supposed to do, because I don't want to go the school route. I don't want to work at a bank. I don't want to be an attorney. I want to, jump out of planes.
Yeah.
Right? Literally, that's what I was watching Joseph Kinninger jump from outer space. And the first video that it suggested to me was a Navy SEALs halo jumping. It was from Joseph Kinninger jumping out of a weather balloon to a video of SEALs jumping out of an airplane at 30,000 feet. And from that video, that's how it showed me Bud's Class 234. From the time I watched that video, 5 years later, I was a jump master in the SEAL teams.
How cool is that, man? Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned you went from that to you being a jump master, because I think there's such a special joy. I think about being at Elevate Life Church now, and the huge building we have and all the people that go there. And I've set up, I grew up similar in that respect of having to set up church on Sundays. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, when you were talking, I sort of grasped how satisfying it must be for Pastor Keith and your dad to be like, man, we used to set this place up on Sunday nights, and now it's already done for us. And
I think it's one of the most.
amazing.
I think it's one of the most special things that you can do in life.
Yes.
to have a dream and to see it happen.
Oh, I could not agree more with that. We're going to come back to that, G. I'm glad you said that. That's like one of the ingredients in your thing, all right? Like I said, it's identity plus dreams plus action. Okay, so let's go back to 8th grade, because this is when I think there really is an interesting pattern that starts in your life that goes all the way through buds, and really, even now you're still this way. So this is when a pattern, let's use our pattern recognition skills. So it was a pattern of things to come for you. You were told in 8th grade, and we're going to, if you're okay with it, I'd like to take some of the pictures that you showed me downstairs so people can see what you look like. People were telling you that you're skinny, that you're goofy.
I want people to see that stuff, because I wish, people do put me up on the SEAL pedestal, and I look different now than I looked back then. But I wish people knew who I could have been. That's what I tell people. I wish you knew who I could have been, because at 12, I saw a potential possibility of being weak, of being scrawny, of being everything that people said that I was. And I saw a potential possibility of what I believed I could be.
And I love that. So, okay. And you were also, at this point, you've joined, it's the same exact time. So you're in 8th grade, you have people at school telling you you're scrawny and you're weak. You're the youngest kid in the youth group, and you have people telling you the same thing. So what was your response to people telling you who you were?
Yeah, so people, told me I'm so skinny.
Yeah.
And as a fact, I was skinny. But to me, I said, no, I'm not.
Right.
Right. And people are like, what do you stand on the scale, look in the mirror, dummy. Like, you are skinny. But inside I said, I'm not skinny. That's not who I am. And so I started going to the gym. I got really obsessed with weightlifting in 8th grade, which a lot of kids don't get into it till later. And that's, all through, it's not common in other states, but in Texas it is common. I got, randomly drug tested almost every year in high school because I was so muscular.
Right.
But because I got if you look at pictures of me my junior and senior year, I'm pretty muscular I'm not like super developed, but I was in pretty good shape. I have a really good picture from when I was 18 that I was like, man, that kid probably looks like he was on the juice. I wasn't.
Yeah.
I did get into some of that stuff at the end of my SEAL career. But at 18 years old, I've been working out for 5 years, like hard. I was into bodybuilding early, so it's going to make you very muscular.
Yeah. So you at that point when they're telling you this is who you are,
so people told me I was skinny. I got very much into weightlifting, and then I did that for a couple months, and I'm getting stronger, but I'm not gaining any weight. And so like there was nothing back then. If you remember the internet in 2003, 2004, it's a very different time on the internet. There's you have bodybuilding.com, which is a bunch of forums of other people who have no idea what they're doing.
Dude, forums. Yes.
Yeah. That's all the internet was back then.
The days, chat rooms.
There was this dude, I don't remember his username, but I remember reading on the forum from this big dude, literally someone's credibility is their profile
Are
picture.
You jacked?
Yeah. Somebody's credibility in a forum is their profile picture. And it was this really massive dude. And I read his response to somebody else of if you want to gain weight, you got to get lots of calories.
Right.
And I don't remember if it was his response or somebody else's, but it was about drinking a gallon of milk a day and how many calories were in that. So I'm like, check, roger that.
Let's go.
So from the right before my freshman year all the way through my junior year, I drank a gallon of milk a day.
Yeah.
I remember my junior, I got somebody, when I transferred to public school, I remember one of my friends, I got him into it, and we would carry it around at school, drinking a gallon of milk a day. People thought we were so weird.
Yeah.
It's, you laugh at people who are carrying around the gallon jug of water.
Yeah.
I'm in public high school walking around with a gallon jug of milk.
Yeah, that's
I
weird.
tried to finish it by lunchtime because it gets bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, you don't even have to refrigerate it. Wow. Dude, that's commitment, though. I'll give you that.
And so I did gain lots of weight. I was, my freshman year, I was 6'1", 135. My senior year, I was 6'1", 205. So that's a lot of muscle gain in 4 years.
So was there a moment when you kind of go ha, I told you, in high school?
Well, I didn't have any it was just voices in my life. I didn't have somebody that I was trying to prove wrong. It was more I would just hear that doubt, and it was just fuel for me. But I was even if I had not had that, I would tell you I knew what I wanted to be. And so even without people calling me skinny, I would have gone in that direction.
Right. So it was more that you were just developing the refusal to listen to what other people said.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Now the reason I wanted to do that is so let's fast forward through high school. Okay. So we know now you've decided to join the SEAL teams, and this pattern begins to play out because you're going to hear a lot of people tell you. So can you, I want you to go, because I know the story, but I want you to take people all the way from the journey of signing up with your instructor. Please talk about basic training and what they called you in basic, to pre-buds, the first 3 weeks of buds. Lead us right up to Hell Week if you can.
So
please.
I mentioned earlier how I watched Buds Class 234 on YouTube. If you've never watched it, watch it. It's a fun watch. It's a Discovery Channel documentary. everything that's in the documentary is true. It's just not everything. There's stuff that's not in the documentary, but what's in the documentary is true. And so I watched that, and a few weeks later, I met my recruiter, right? Like I went and saw him for the first time, and I quickly pivoted my training. So all that existed back then, there's a lot of like, CrossFit is born out of the SEAL team. So one of the original creators of, not Glassman, but one of the guys who helped form the sport is a Navy SEAL. And so that's like, if you could do CrossFit to prepare for SEAL training, that'd be pretty good, except for you need to do some more running. But back then there were no like SEAL workouts. There wasn't CrossFit. But there was a workout called the Murph after Lieutenant Michael Murphy, Medal of Honor winner, gave his life trying to save his platoon. And so all I did to prepare for SEAL training was I did the Murph every day for months. I didn't know any better. It's like there was no SEALs to today. Like I have tadpoles who just DM me on Instagram.
Well, our YouTube channel is like
none of that stuff existed back then. There was no help. There was no books. There was no guides. There was no soft prep website, none of that stuff. So I just did, the Murph every day. But a few weeks later, after watching the documentary, I end up at my recruiter's office, and I told, I had read some forums, right, about trying to get a contract, and people had said they'll try to get you to sign up for other stuff,
right?
And that was all I needed to read,
right? So
that I walked in there, and before you can have any conversation, you just got to take an ASVAB. Yep. I did that. Do the ASVAB. Do really good on it. And I come back, and they're like, I actually scored close to a perfect score on the ASVAB. They're like, oh, you need to be a nuke. Right? That's you have to have a very high ASVAB to qualify for a nuke. Not very many students qualify. And no hate on the nukes, right? Like one of our friends I don't know if you know this, but one of our friends at Mighty Men was a nuke. Most people think that if in the Navy, a lot of people call the nukes are nerdy guys, right?
Okay.
It's because you're very smart. But anyways, they're like, oh, you should do this or you should do that. And I said, no, write me a SEAL contract today. This is what I'm doing. And my recruiter, I still remember his name, Brandon. We're friends on Facebook. He told me after the fact, not to my face then, but after the fact later, he's like, man, I thought you were the most arrogant kid that I had ever met, because and he told me, he's like, why should you get a SEAL contract? He told me I've had 5 other kids write a SEAL. Yeah, I've written a SEAL contract for 5 other kids in the last year, and none of them made it. Why do you want to do that? Why don't you? And also they're incentivized to get guys to sign up for the nuke programs and stuff like that. And he's like, and you'll get this bonus if you're a nuke and all this stuff. And I was like, I don't want to do anything else unless you're going to write me a SEAL contract. If you're not going to write me a SEAL contract, I'm going to walk out of here. And I was just extremely stubborn with this guy. Get me the SEAL contract. I go do my PST physical screening test, qualify for my contract. And this is like November, December timeframe. I get a contract in January and I leave in June.
Wow.
Right. It was a very quick pivot for me. I mean, I think I saw my recruiter for the first time in November, got a contract in January. I joined the Navy, June 2nd, 2010.
Right. And so then you're off and go, okay, so now I know you go to pre-buds, or where do you go from here? Yeah,
so the first thing you do is you join and you go straight to boot camp, which I would tell you, boot camp, 8 weeks of boot camp is some of the worst part of the experience, really? Honestly. A different type of worse. The physical training's not that hard. They do you do everything that the other Navy sailors do, but you wake up an hour and a half early to do extra workouts.
Oh, okay.
You go do SEAL training workouts, but you want to do that stuff because you're in such good shape,
right?
That if you're not doing those workouts, guys lose conditioning in boot camp.
Okay.
Right. So literally guys are trying to do pull-ups off the sides of the beds and stuff at night before we go to sleep because you're losing your level of conditioning because they make you do all this other random stuff. Anyways, boot camp was the first wake-up call for me. One, boot camp is a shock for everybody, right? Because, okay, you're in the military now and they try to make it, they try to shock you and all that stuff. But I had this boot camp instructor who didn't like me. And one of the things that that a lot of guys do through SEAL training is they try to be what's called a gray man.
Right.
So just my last name is Smith. Yes. I'm 5'9". I'm a white kid, and you're just gonna never see me, and you won't pay attention to me. Well, one, my last name's Unclebach, so you're going to know my name.
Yeah.
Which, when I was young, I was like, man, why this name's kind of strange. I love my last name now because nobody ever forgets it.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone, you meet me, you'll remember my name, and there's no other Unclebachs out there.
Probably won't say it right, but you will remember.
That's true. But I had this instructor who not only knew my name, but took my number. He didn't like me for whatever reason. I don't know if he just saw qualities in me, but then he started to like push on me a little bit. And this is, I'll come back to this quality a little bit later, but this guy hated my level of resilience.
Right.
I didn't know this until after we finished boot camp. One of the other SEALs knew who this guy was. And he's like, oh yeah, that guy failed out of the EOD program.
Okay.
So like he had tried to join one of the special operations programs and failed out of it. And so he hated my level of reassurance.
Because he knows that you're on a SEAL contract.
Yeah, everyone in this instructor over our boot camp class, everyone in that boot camp class is on their way to SEAL training.
Okay.
Right. And he, I'm one of the youngest, so that's also another reason to single me out. And one time he's picking on me and kind of questioning me, and I remember exactly what the specific line of questioning was. But what I said to him was that I know I'm going to become a SEAL, and that really bothered him.
Right.
And so he's like, you know, and I'm like, yeah, I know I'm going to become a SEAL. And he's like, and he's saying like, oh, that's arrogant. You don't know. You can't control this. And he's like, I said, I know I'm going to become a SEAL. Like, there's no doubt for me. And that really bothered him. And so he continued to like he would punish me in front of the class, do all kinds of different things to me because the fact that I wouldn't, like he wanted me to just admit that there was a chance I wouldn't make it. And I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it for him. I was going to do it. What was more important is that I felt that way.
Yeah.
Right. So even just if I would lament that and say it to him, that I was allowing that in, and I would not even allow the doubt in. And I was willing to put up with whatever I had to put up with from this guy because I knew that I was going to make it.
Yeah.
I was not even going to allow doubt in, and I wouldn't even falsely admit it to somebody. And so that really bothered this guy. And he called me like goof troop all the time and said all these things to me, tried to berate me. And so that was kind of the beginning for me of being on a little bit of a lonely path going into SEAL training. It doesn't help to be that young.
Yeah.
It's just I can't, when you're 19 years old, you can't go out and drink with everybody. You can't go out and do all the things everyone does. Everyone else has got a car. I'm just a poor 19-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Last dollar I took from my parents was when I left for the Navy. I didn't have anything. And so anyways, that experience going into boot camp was the beginning of me hearing a lot of doubters' voices in my life. I'd grown up for 18 years at that point, being surrounded by people who love me, believe in me, encourage me. And now here I am surrounded by nobody that believes in me. Nobody's encouraging me. And this was the beginning of the test of my identity. So come out of boot camp, we go into pre-buds.
Well, hang on real quick. Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you real quick. So I hear what you're saying about you had everybody believing in you. But the reason I wanted to point out to people is these things, much like a human being grows, certain patterns in your life grow, right? So like that's why I wanted to highlight 8th grade and being the youngest kid in youth group, because you talked about it. You got picked on. You're 12 and there's 16, 17-year-olds. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to mess with you.
Oh, man. Even Pastor Tad back then, like everyone made fun of me.
Yeah.
That we went on a mission trip that year where I'm 12 and everyone's 16, 17, and 18. And it was only because I was tough that I didn't cry.
Right.
But they were hard on me.
Right.
But I can tell you a year and 2 years later, like I was so tough. And like new people would come in who were like older than me, but like 15 or 16. And I'm giving them a hard time. Right. Because I've received so much of it. So that also makes you tough being around people who've always pushed you.
Yeah. But I'm saying, so like that's a small pattern. And like, obviously, it's in church, so they're not going to like brutalize you the way they would in the military. But now fast forward, okay, the encouraging voice is you got to go home to your parents. Now you don't get to go home to your parents. You go back to the barracks. But at least this is not like the first time you've had people tell you that you can't do it.
It was just a different kind of crazy. Right. Because in high school, people would tell me I'm crazy and they're like, oh, you can't do that. But they're not trying to push me down. Right. Right. But now I'm surrounded by people who are telling me that I'm crazy and that I'm delusional.
Right. Right. Okay. And they're in authority as well. And they are trying to push you down.
So
okay, keep going. Sorry.
So we moved past boot camp and then I end up in pre-buds. So pre-buds is it's like a 6-week course before you go to buds, because the Navy realized like guys come out of boot, here's where their test scores before boot camp. And then they come out of boot camp and their test scores are 70% of what they were. Wow. They realize that guys need time to rebuild their conditioning. Right. So pre-buds is really just athletic training camp to rebuild your strength, to rebuild your endurance. Okay. Because it just takes so much time to be in that level of conditioning, and boot camp doesn't give you enough time to keep that level of conditioning. But my roommate in pre-buds, very interesting. His father was a Navy SEAL, right? So he's a legacy student, and this was his second. He had tried to go through buds at 19 like I was, and he was coming back for a second time. He was either 24 or 25 years old. Right.
Okay.
So this was his second time at Buds. So he not only does, is his father a SEAL that he knows a lot about this program that I know nothing about. It's also his second time. So he's been there.
Yeah.
Right. And so he has a different perspective. He has a lot of perspective that I don't have. He's also the number one athlete in the class in pre-Buds, because that's all pre-Buds is about, is athletic ability and training your athletic ability. They rank everyone in swimming, running, and strength. And overall, he was the number one athlete in the class. And he's my roommate. And he would tell me every day, you have no chance here. He would remind me all the time, you have no chance here. He'd be like, I don't know why you even thought you should sign up for this program. Like, he just made it a point to lay into me every day. And I think, and they're like, I remember over time where he tried to like at least kind of open up to me and say like, I'm just trying to like, I don't want you to get your hopes up. Right. And what he was really putting on me was his story of when he was 19. Right. But so I had to deal with that all the time. And I thought I was a good athlete until I went and was around a bunch of really good athletes at 19 against a bunch of 24 and 25-year-olds. And a lot of these guys are college athletes, NCAA athletes. I was in the bottom third of the class. Right. So it's not like I had a lot of confidence in my physical ability at that point. And he's telling me all the time, like, you're not going to make it. I mean, I was barely passing some of the runs and swims. The strength, I had good strength because that's what I'd always done bodybuilding. Right. But the runs and swims were very hard for me.
Now, you don't realize that this guy is projecting onto you until after the fact. You just know this guy's saying something different to what I believe, so I have to ignore it.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing discipline.
It was, the reason I was able to do that is because even though, this guy has a lot of experience and perspective that I don't have, I still would look at him and think, you don't know me as well as my father does, right? You don't know me as well as these people do. And also, I have a lot of experience that you don't know about.
Right.
All you see is that I'm not as fast as you,
right?
And I know because, and also, you got to think about this, some of my matrix mindset as well. I know that the race is not to the swiftest. This is not about who's the strongest here. Right. This is not about who's the fastest swimmer. So I just quietly ignore him. That guy was one of the first people to quit in my Buds class. Right. He didn't make it as far as he made it when he was 19 because of this. Because of he psyched himself out.
Wow, I didn't realize he did. So there you go. I didn't know that he was 19 his first time either.
Yeah, that's part of the reason, he felt he was telling me you have no chance. And I remember there was only one person, like I've been rude to people. I can count on my hands the amount of times I've been like rude or cruel to people, and you don't count.
I was about to say,
it's for your personal.
All those fingers.
It's for your personal growth and development.
Thank you.
I remember when that guy quit. You don't normally see guys after they quit. And I don't remember what I said, but I remember how I felt when I went up and spoke because I saw him that night after he had quit. And I remember going up and talking to him. I don't remember what I said because it was emotional for me. But that was a moment for me that I realized like he represented all of this doubt and my doubt died when he quit.
Oh man, that gives me chills, dude. I love that. Okay. So I hope you guys are seeing a pattern. Now let's fast forward to week 4, which is a little thing called Hell Week. And everybody knows about Hell Week. You're going to be working out from Sunday evening through Friday afternoon.
It's not really a workout. It's more of a beat down. Hell Week starts on Sunday night, and they put you in the classroom. You literally wait in this classroom around 1 o'clock, and then Hell Week's going to start anywhere from like 8 p.m. to midnight, and they don't tell you when, and you're just literally sitting there waiting in anticipation of the hardest week of military training. You don't know when it's going to start. And so it goes from Sunday night all the way until Friday afternoon. And in that time, you'll sleep 1 hour on Wednesday and you'll sleep 1 hour on Thursday. They added that into the training because they realized that if we don't let them sleep for at least an hour on Wednesday and at least an hour on Thursday, that it can cause brain damage.
Quick question. Do you know you're going to get that 1 hour of sleep each of those days going into it?
You do know that because they put up tents and everything, it's a part of the training, and you actually even see that in Bud's Class 234 documentary. And that's really some of the only stuff that was out there now. And that was some of the only stuff that was out there then. So you do know that, but you don't really know like all the evolutions and everything. You just know that you're going to get destroyed.
Right. So you're sat there in the classroom.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there in the classroom and we begin to have this conversation because we're sitting here for hours. You just kind of sit in your boat crew and like, it's a weird feeling to just like be sitting there waiting to start the most difficult thing you've ever done in your life. And you're supposed to just sit there patiently. A lot of guys are very uncomfortable. Some guys are like pacing. Some guys are trying to be chill. Some guys are getting, they've got a whole can of dip in their mouth because they're not going to get it. If you've been in the Navy, you get it because they're not going to get any dip for the next week. And my boat crews, start to ask each other, hey, do you think you'll make it? right? We start having this conversation, and everyone gives their answer, and I'm the last to go. And they're like, well, how about you, Unclebach? Do you think you'll make it? And what I said was, not only do it, this was my opportunity to let out, because at this point I had very few friends.
Yeah.
There was one guy that was my friend. His name was Brian. He was one of the oldest guys in our class, and he was just a really nice guy. He was a great performer, and he really liked me.
Yeah.
And he didn't drink. He had chose to not drink. So he would be like, we would go out together we'd go see movies and do stuff. And he's like, yeah, I don't want to hang out with those guys, because everyone would go drink on the weekends. So he was like one of my only friends. But I had very few guys kind of like develop relationship and cliques too, based upon the quality of your performance. Right. And I wasn't one of the top performers. But so anyways, because I didn't have a lot of friends, I'd really just kind of like become a quiet performer. And when we'd done like some of the really tough things, like some of the hardest boat sessions or hardest log sessions, I'd done well. And that was really just confidence for me. But because, and I was the fastest in my class on the obstacle course, and that was because of all my parkour skills. Yes. But other than that, I still performed very poorly on the runs and the swims. Yeah. Not so bad on the swims, but the runs I barely passed. So that has, people just don't look at me as that great. And so there's some guys in the class who are like, oh yeah, that guy's a stud. And a lot of those guys end up quitting, right? But no one was looking at me that way. And so finally I've just been quiet up until this point. And so my boat crew finally asked me, they all give their answer, and, there's some level of assurance and confidence, some doubt in people's answers. And they asked me, do you think you'll make it? And I said, not only do I think I'll make it, I know I'll make it. And on Saturday, when everyone goes, because you finish on Friday, and then Saturday morning, this is a very sad story. This recently happened. A student after Hell Week died, right? Because it is a traumatic hit on your body. Like, people say you lose like 5 years off your life going through Hell Week. Like, wow. You take a hit on your health going through this program. You don't want to do it multiple times. So they finish you on Friday afternoon. Saturday morning, you do like a full health checkup. They examine you and do all of this stuff, right? Because some guys end up getting, like, they do health exams on Saturday, and some guys go to the ICU after that. Right. Like, you have blood in your lungs. You have 3 broken ribs. You have a cracked tibia. Like, they realize a lot of guys have serious health problems after Hell Week. What I said to my boat crew, I says, not only am I going to finish, not only do I think I'm going to finish, I know I'm going to finish. And on Saturday, after med checks, when everyone's on crutches, because I had seen this, I had watched a class finish, and they looked like a bunch of zombies. They all looked like they'd been run over, and then an 18-wheeler backed over them again and then ran forward over them. I mean, you look destroyed. And I said, not only am I going to finish, but on Saturday after med checks, when everyone's on crutches, when everyone looks like freaking dog food, I'm going to go for a run on the beach by myself.
What did they say?
They're like, all right, whatever, Unclebach. Like, that was the end of the conversation.
Right.
And long story short, well, first off, this isn't a lot for my story, but it was something that impacted me dramatically. Sunday night of Hell Week, the one guy who's my friend, Brian, he quits. Mm. We're at the beginning of Hell Week. We're like 2 hours in. Yeah. There's nothing that's happened that's harder than anything we've done for the last 4 weeks. We're in surf torture, right? Which we've done dozens of times already in Buds. We're in surf torture, and he starts to like get up, and I'm like, I literally yell, Brian, quit messing around, like, quit shaking me. Yeah. Let's just sit here in the water. And no, he gets up to run and I tried to pull him back, and the instructors start yelling. But anyways, as I like grab his hand to try and pull him back, and he says to me, I can't do this, but you can. Man. And that was like broke my heart, because this is like my one friend here, and he quits and leaves me. And that's on Sunday night. So like, I literally just sat there for the next 30 minutes in surf torture, thinking about like, man, I've got to steel myself, right? That was my last friend. Like, we're 2 hours into this, and I'm all alone now. Yeah. That was a moment for me in Hell Week. Another interesting moment in Hell Week. I don't think you've ever heard me say this before. There's a moment in Hell Week. You do this thing in surf torture. This was like on a Wednesday in surf torture called rocking chairs. Yes. And so think about being on the beach in San Diego, your head towards the water, so feet towards the sand, up on the beach. And so the water is just coming over your face. Yeah. It's very uncomfortable. Your eyes and your ears will fill up with sand, like if you just sit there in the water, how your shorts are filled up with sand. Well, your head will do that too. It's
Good
really,
to know. Uh-huh.
your ears will fill up with sand so bad. Like when you stand up, you have no balance because like one ear's, it's very uncomfortable. But anyways, they'll do this thing to you where you're in that position. So your feet are a little bit elevated. There's the slope of the beach, and the instructors will say, hey, we're going to do rocking chairs, and they'll press the buzzer on the bullhorn. And every time they press the buzzer, you have to kick your feet over your head and touch the sand behind you.
Yeah.
Right. And they would do these to a 50 count or to 100 count. And there's a lot of these things in buds where the instructors are saying like, hey, we're going to do this till someone quits, or we're going to keep doing push-ups until everyone can do 5 push-ups right. Some of that's a game. Sometimes it's an exercise, right? At least when you're doing this with push-ups, you can see that everyone's either doing them or not doing them. When we're doing rocking chairs, your eyes are closed. Right. You can't see anything. And we were doing rocking chairs. We were past 100 count, and an instructor comes out in the water and grabs me. And I'm like, oh, what did I do?
Yeah.
Right. And grabs me out of the water, pulls me up on the beach, says, turn around. I want you to see this. For the last 100 count, they hit the buzzer and I'm kicking my feet behind my head, toes hitting the sand. I'm back. Like I'm like crushing this exercise, right? It's very uncomfortable, but it's not like a physical fitness exercise. It's just a very painful exercise.
Right.
And he's like, I want you to see this. And the instructors, they're hitting the bullhorn, and I'm watching them. I'm watching like 1 out of 50 students in my class actually touch their feet behind their head.
Huh.
Right? We've been doing hundreds of these because people aren't performing. And that, like, I didn't know this. Like, I can't see anyone else. And I realized I just did the last few hundred of these perfectly, and I'm watching the rest of my class not do them correctly. It's a handful of students doing good ones. I'm the one that they pulled out of the class. That was also a moment for me too, that I realized, like, when no one else could see each other, that I was doing the right thing. So that was a moment that always stuck with me. But then we finished Hell Week, and I won't go long on any of the other stories because it just takes too long. But we finished Hell Week, and we go through med checks on Saturday, and I feel really good. We finished around noon on Friday. And I remember calling my dad. I just wasn't tired. I didn't want to go to, like, it was crazy. It was, you just have such an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
I called my dad. I called Josh. I called Pastor Keith. I'm trying to think who else I called. I talked to my mom for a little bit. They give you a pizza. I ate a whole Domino's pizza, and I was just like sitting around. I didn't want to go to sleep. Then I finally lay down and go to sleep. You sleep like a rock. The next morning, a lot of people wake up and their hands and their feet are like the size of a melon.
Right.
From like all this swelling. And we go to med checks, and, a couple of the students from my class are already in ICU. A lot of guys are like, there's another half dozen guys on crutches. A lot of guys, their waistline looks like hamburger meat from all the chafe.
Yeah.
And like, this is just like straight a miracle, but I had no chafe from Hell Week. Wasn't on crutches, wasn't really in any pain. My toes were a little busted.
Right.
And I had my toenails were a little busted, and I had no feeling in my toes. I have really skinny toes, and all the cold water, I couldn't feel my toes at all. Other than that, I was fine. We finished med checks. A bunch of people, were busted. I changed out into my clothes. It was raining, and I went for a run on the beach by myself, which the one thing you want after Hell Week is just to be dry.
Right. It's raining.
Yeah. It was raining. It wasn't raining that bad, but it was rain. It was a San Diego rain. It's not like a Texas rain.
Yeah.
But I ran from the base down to the rocks in front of the Dell, which is it's right at a half mile. Ran down to the rocks and climbed out there a few ways onto the rocks. And I was like, I'm just going to climb out here for a moment because I really just don't want to turn around and run back yet.
Right. Yeah.
I want to sit and catch my breath. But then as I was catching my breath, just kind of like, it's kind of funny to think about. I've just been through like the hardest training in the world, but I'm also like putting off just running a half mile back to base. And I'm sitting there on the rock, and I just kind of really starts to soak in that, 6 months ago, because that's when I finished Hell Week. This is November 2010. If you go back to November 2009, I just watched Bud's Class 234 documentary. Wow. So here we are a year later, and I've dreamed this dream of, I can do this. And not only can I do it, but I commanded it. I willed it. I had this vision of what it would be like. And just like I'd had the vision when I was, a young teenager of doing a side flip, I'd had this vision, which I had seen over and over again, of me going on. The reason, the significance of the run was that was my visualization.
Yes.
I pictured what it would feel like to go on that run after. right? Like my victory lap of finishing training. The one thing that no one wants to do after Hell Week is go for a run. That's what I'm going to do. And I thought about it over and over and over again, just like I had thought about that side flip. And so here I am sitting on the rocks, realizing the power of my ability to dream, what I'm capable of if I'll put my mind to it. And that'll be one of the defining moments of my life until I die, to realize what you can do by the power of your thought.
So that's what you thought about. You kind of thought back to, hey, a year ago I watched this, and you kind of connected some of the dots.
Yeah. Well, I thought back to a year, and I also thought back to the moment when I had first got to San Diego and I saw the guys after Hell Week. And I said, I'm going to finish, but I won't look like that.
Man, I love that. I hope everybody understands I've got one more question, and I think, we've gone a little bit over an hour, so we do need to wrap, but I hope everybody understands why I gave the formula I did about identity plus dreams plus action equals possible. How many times during this conversation has Garrett talked about belief, about seeing something in his mind first and then going out and making it a reality? And you still do that. If people are wondering what you followed up on, you've got multiple companies. You're involved with venture to capital. You've got a construction company, a property development company. Obviously, what we do here on the podcast, you're a men's minister, and you're constantly going around and bringing things that you see in your mind first to a reality. And so you've continued that trend. And the reason I put that formula together equals possible is because all these things that you talked about were things that you were told were not possible. You had lots of people telling you why you couldn't do it. But it was that belief that stemmed from a place of identity, which, like we said, if you don't get that from your parents, you can still develop that. Like what Garrett developed and that sense of trust and that sense of belief and that sense of identity that he got at a young age, if you didn't get it at a young age, it's not too late. But it is so powerful to be able to change your trajectory.
I love the Seneca quote, and this is reflective of many people's lives. Seneca said, most people suffer more in their minds than in reality, right? You make it harder in your mind than it actually is in real life. That's true for a lot of people, but I know the opposite can be true as well. I know that even in the most difficult circumstances, that by the power of my thought, right? God gave me this ability to think. God gave me this ability to believe. I have to choose it. I have to choose to think right. I have to choose to believe. I have to choose to be disciplined. But I can make these choices, and even when life is full of suffering, that I don't have to suffer.
I love that, man. All right, my last question, dude, because I could just go off here about the things I love, but that's kind of self-indulgent because it's our podcast. But so what are your superpowers, man?
I have a few. The superpower that God gave all of us is a superpower to choose, right? You get to choose how you think. You get to choose how you feel. But I would tell you one of my distinct superpowers that I wish I could give to everyone, and you can have it if you want it, if you'll develop it, is the power of perspective.
Yes.
The ability that I call to zoom in and to zoom out, right? You ask people, and I won't go long into this, but you ask people who don't make it through training, and you ask them, why did you quit? And they'll give this answer of, they've made it about themselves, but they've also put training in this perspective where they went through the hardest day that they could possibly imagine. And they say to themselves, man, I can't do this I know I did this today, but I can't do this for 179 more days, right? Because SEAL training is 180 days long. Versus the other way of thinking, that's zooming in like, man, it's so hard and I can't stay in this place for 179 more days. Versus the other thing you can do is you can zoom out, right? And you can zoom out on your entire life. You can zoom out all the way to eternity and say, man, this is just 6 months of my life. This is just a season of me paying my price that'll mean something for the rest of my life. I put everything in my entire destiny I put on the line for this. It doesn't mean that it was, but to me it was. I put it that way in my mind, like the man that I want to be, the family that I want to have, everything that I want to do with my life hinges on this moment. Right. And so I had that ability to create that perspective and zoom out and say, from this season of my life, everything that I'm supposed to do after will happen. Right. And so instead of zooming in on the pain and saying, man, I don't know how much longer I could do this, I'm saying I have to do this because this is what matters afterwards. Right. And so you have the ability to give meaning to meaning, and you also have the ability to zoom in and zoom out on a situation in your life. The more you zoom in, oftentimes you'll find more pain. When you zoom out, you'll find purpose. And so when I would zoom out of this difficult season of my life, when I'd zoom out of 6 months of SEAL training that felt like forever, that an hour of SEAL training was miserable, let alone 6 months.
Yeah.
But when I zoomed out, it mattered so much to the rest of my life, and I gave great purpose to it. So I was able to push through it.
I love that. Well, anything, Chief, challenges that you would give to people? Because I think I hope people see the
my challenge to everyone, not just with this episode, but with my life, is that I hope that people will realize that anything is possible for them.
Yes.
It's Henry Ford's, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. It's self-fulfilling. It's the infinite potential unlock. God has a plan for your life. God wants to do something with you. You're going to have to make some difficult choices. You are going to get to learn the skill, learn the ability that God gives us the opportunity to learn of endurance, but you can have anything you want as long as you're willing to pay the price for it, right? Again, that is self-fulfilling. If you believe that, it can be true for you. If you say that's not true for me, or I don't want it to be because I don't want pain, then you won't develop yourself into who you're called to be. But for all of us, who we're really meant to be on this earth lies beyond what we think is possible, right? So as we'll just continue to take steps, if we'll continue to grow, and if we'll have the mindset that says, I know I can become more, eventually you'll get to the end of your life and you'll get to hear those words that we all want to hear. Well done, good and faithful servant.